Well, welcome back for Personality Lecture Part 2. So in this part, we're going to be talking about specific personality theories aside from Freud. And so we're going to start actually, and this is going to be a much shorter lecture, so don't worry. The first part is talking about what's called the social cognitive theory. Basically, it talks about how we focus on how we can interact with our culture and our environment. You don't have to know about Albert and Bandura right now for this, but reciprocal determinism says that, let's see, unblock that for you, that traits, environment, and behavior all interact and influence each other. So I want you to think about this. Do you act differently sometimes in certain situations versus a different situation? Maybe you act differently when you're at home versus when you're at work. That basically environmental factors, along with your own personal factors, influence your behavior, influence how you act. And so that can be maybe with certain groups of friends, you tend to be more outgoing and talkative, while other groups of friends, you might be quieter and more reserved. Again, same thing with family. Maybe in some circumstances with your family, you tend to speak your mind, and other family members, you tend to be, more closed up and more shut down. I had a great example of this years ago. I went to a counseling conference and in Nashville, Tennessee, and my mom wanted to go with me. And I had been married for probably 10 years by now, maybe even longer. We had little kids at home, so my husband was at home with the kids. And this conference was going to be really huge. It was really big. It was like 7,000 counselors there. And so my mom is not a counselor, was not a counselor, but she had gone through a lot of her own counseling, read a lot of self-help books, and so she was very interested in going to this with me. Well, I was raised in a family where I was kind of taught to be like seen and not heard. I was the good little blonde girl who would sit while my parents visited with their friends, and I would sit there with my hands in my lap and be very quiet and eventually usually fall asleep. And so I know you probably wouldn't think of that now, because when I'm in class, I tend to be very, talkative and outgoing. But how I was raised with my family looked very different. So I go to this thing in Nashville with her, and I found I was struggling so much with being the person that I've become as an adult and being outgoing, because I had this person sitting next to me the whole time that had always given me this different message. And so because of those personal factors of how I was raised and the developmental messages I was given, again, it was just kind of frustrating because I was fighting that idea that I wasn't supposed to talk with the person I am now, who likes to be outgoing and friendly and talk to strangers and say, hey, where are you from? And what do you do? And tell me what your work looks like and all that stuff. But so that is just an example of social cognitive theory. It also talks about how we have an internal locus of control, that my actions affect the consequence. An external locus of control is my life is controlled by others, luck, or fate. Unfortunately, with external locus of control, that can lead to a state of learned helplessness. And you've probably met these people. The people with the external locus of control, they're always blaming everybody else for what's going on in their life. We actually have a kind of a term we use. It's become kind of a popular term recently called gaslighting. When people blame others for their, well, if you just didn't make me mad, or I would have done this if you wouldn't have. And that is basically an external locus of control. It's not taking ownership over your own choices versus saying, so let's say we have this guy over here who's like kind of overweight, right? If he has an internal locus of control, he may go, yeah, I eat, I don't exercise and therefore I'm putting on weight. An external locus control person would be like, well, if you didn't stress me out, I wouldn't stress eat, and therefore, you know what, I wouldn't be gaining this weight. It's all your fault because you stressed me out. Okay, let's move on to trait theories. By the way, your incentive word for this week is trait theory. In fact, let me make that more clear to you. Your trait theory word is your incentive word. Okay, so incentive word, trait theory. Just wanted to make that clear. Okay, so what does trait theory of personality say? It says they believe that we can describe people's personalities by specifying their main characteristics or traits. That basically by doing this, it can help predict the future. So how does that work? If one of your traits is being an extrovert, actually, let's go the opposite way, an introvert, you can predict that in the future, in a situation that's like big social gathering or something, you will probably be more likely to be an introvert and be, stand back a little bit in that situation. But it also says that traits like honesty, laziness, ambition, and being outgoing are thought to be stable over the course of your lives. I can see where there's some things that it goes in line with. I think there's some traits that we seem to develop over time. Maybe you weren't lazy when you were younger and you were like, go, 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 do everything right now. But you've kind of developed some bad habits. So I think we have to sometimes distinguish between bad habits and traits in our personality. Okay. Nomothetic theories. If you were around in the 90s, you might remember Vinny and the Situation from Jersey Shore. Excuse me, they were great examples between extroverts and introverts, but if you don't even remember them and you have no idea what I'm talking about, you usually think of somebody in your head when I say extrovert. That is a person who is getting energized by being around others. And then the introvert, they can act like an extrovert, but it drains them of their energy. Okay, so these according to nomothetic theories, we all have the same traits but at varying degrees. So everybody has an introvert and extrovert side, but it's somewhere in the middle that you find yourself. And so a good way to remember is by using the big five, OCEAN, okay? Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. So, openness, are you open to new experiences? Conscientiousness, those people who are really caring about how other people view them. Extrovert, well, again, that's introvert versus extrovert. Agreeableness, are they easy to get along with? And neuroticism, are they emotionally stable? Factor analysis is used to see the clusters and score these tests. So we are actually going to be taking a test this week, and it is going to be, excuse me, hey, just like class, I stop and cough. You are going to take a personality test, and it's going to give you some different letters that's going to tell you basically some traits. But what it does is you're going to answer some really random questions. And the random questions might be like, I like to spend time in my room, or I like to read lots of books, or I like to be out with people a lot more. And based on your questions, there's not one that is the magical answer that says, oh, they're an extrovert or they're an introvert. Instead, it will it clusters, or it scores those, and it will see kind of where the cluster of your answers lie on the scale. And wherever it lies, it will put you more in one direction or the other. And I even think that this specific test that that I have linked for you will tell you what percentage it really speaks to you, okay? We also have idiographic theorists that focus on the individual and emphasize the unique personal experience of human nature. It does not seek to formulate laws or generalize results to others. So it's basically saying that it can look different, like extrovert can look different between one person and another. So instead of just having those 5 main traits, they came up with what was called the 16 PF, which is the surface traits included those found by, they're called source traits, which are basic traits that are underlying surface traits. I know that's confusing. You don't really have to know that for a test or anything. Okay, let's move on to trait theory criticism. Basically, the critics of trait theory say, hey, you know what? This does not take into account the importance of situations like social theory did, right? If you look at these pictures, I mean, these are just random of The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, but if you look at him up where he is, WWE wrestler, he looks mad, he looks angry, he looks like he's just an angry person. You look at him with his family, and he looks like a teddy bear. So again, traits don't always, sometimes situation can influence how we are and our behavior. There are some biological theories of personality. So you guys tell me, what do you think? I mean, I know you can't tell me because we're doing this online, but think about how much of your personality do you think you inherited, and how much of it do you think you learned? We don't really know. We're not sure. But what we do know is your temperament seems to be stable from infant to old age. So again, if you were told, hey, you were pretty easygoing as a baby, you probably have stayed easygoing as an adult, unless something has happened. If you've experienced a trauma or major drama in your life, that of course can influence how you take on the world. But there are those babies out there who just kind of are, they're just sour or cranky, and they end up being maybe a little bit more melancholy as adults. So that's the idea, is that it stays with you over your lifetime. So how do we assess personality? Well, the most common way is to take self-report inventories like you're going to do online this week. The most famous self-inventory is called the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. Again, what we need to know is the test must be reliable. So does it yield the same results over time? And is it valid? Is it measuring what it's supposed to be? There are a lot of different personality tests out there, and of course you are more than welcome to take them. Here's my warning to you: do not let them define your life. I remember when I was in college, there was one where I think the different ones were like melancholy and I can't remember all of them right now, all the words that they used, but I would have people go, well, I'm a such and such, and so that's why. And I'm like, you're letting that test define you. Don't do that. If you want to take a personality test, take it, and then learn about, let it help you understand why maybe you are the way you are or do the things you do, but don't let it pigeonhole you that you can't do anything differently because, well, that's not my personality. Okay. Here's some sample questions of the MMPI. I like mechanics magazines. Oh, it's basically true and false answers. I like mechanics magazines. I have a good appetite. I wake up fresh and rested most mornings. I think I would like the work of a librarian. I'm going to skip down because, again, I just want to show you that it has a whole lot of different kinds of questions. I am sure I get the raw deal of life. My father was a good man. I am seldom troubled by constipation. I have diarrhea once a month or more. And so, evil spirits possess me at times. So as you can tell, are a lot of different kinds of questions. So I actually had to take the MMPI to get into my graduate school program. And it was really funny because I really wanted to be so honest and truthful. And I was in the moment. But I was also getting the flu. And so I had the chills. I had a major headache. I had that raw sore throat when I went in. And this was like the first day I was getting the flu. So it was like that overwhelming, like, I just want to go home. And a friend of mine who was a therapist basically said, hey, I have one of these tests because I needed to have it taken and sent to the college in a timely manner. And so they're like, yeah, come into my office when you have free time. Well, I made an appointment to do that. And he put me in like this little tiny room, kind of like I'm in right now, but it had a fluorescent light in it. And I felt terrible. And so when they asked me questions about my health, like, I am troubled by attacks of nausea and vomiting. Well, I put true. And I mean, so basically when the results came back, they're like, Michelle, you kind of, it sounds like you have some issues with something called histrionic. And what that means is you think you're sick all the time. And I'm like, no, I really don't. You just have to understand this is where I was that day. And I was really trying to be in the moment. So just beware. These have some room for error in them, in the tests. So the other thing we need to be careful of is what's called the Barnum Effect. People have the tendency to see themselves in vague stock descriptions of personality. Basically, for years, horoscopes, astrologers, and psychics all have used this concept. Pretty much, you could probably read almost any of the horoscopes. I know you usually go to yours, right? Whether you're an Aries or a Sagittarius, you look for yours and you read it. And you're like, okay, yeah, that sounds like me. Or something that can apply to you. Honestly, you could probably go to almost anyone and it might apply to you if it's just one of those stock descriptions. So just be aware of that. That is it for this. Again, go online and do the personality tests I've given you on our module. And again, your incentive word is trait theory. And we will see you next week. Bye.